High atop the fog-covered cliffs, the decrepit manor stood like a forgotten relic of another time. Its once grand windows were now shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of countless years of neglect. Ravens, their feathers black as night, circled the manor, their cries echoing through the mist, a constant reminder of the curse that had haunted Morrigan's bloodline for centuries. She had returned to this forsaken place, drawn by the whispers of an ancient curse that tied her fate to the cursed manor. Every step she took toward the entrance sent chills down her spine, her instincts screaming to turn back. But she knew there was no escape. Not anymore. Inside, the air was thick with decay. The grand hall, once a place of elegance, now lay in ruins with faded tapestries lining the walls and broken chandeliers scattered across the floor. Shadows seemed to shift in the corners of the room, and the ever-present sound of raven wings flapping echoed through the empty corridors. Morrigan could feel the weight of her ancestors' mistakes pressing down on her, each step a reminder of the blood curse that plagued her family. Veyra, her only remaining confidant, stood at her side, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. They had come to this forsaken place seeking answers, but what they would find, Morrigan feared, could cost them more than their lives. The curse had begun long before Morrigan's time, whispered about in hushed tones by those who dared to speak of it. The ravens were more than mere birds. They were the spirits of the cursed, trapped between life and death, bound to the manor and its inhabitants. Morrigan had spent her life running from this legacy, hoping to escape the fate that had claimed her ancestors. But as the last surviving member of her bloodline, she had no choice but to confront it head-on. The manor was alive, its walls pulsing with the energy of the curse, and Morrigan could feel its pull, drawing her deeper into the darkness. As they ventured further into the manor, the ravens grew louder, their cries piercing the silence like a warning. Veyra's expression hardened, her hand hovering near the hilt of her blade, though they both knew no weapon could fight what awaited them here. Morrigan's heart raced as they approached the grand staircase, its steps worn from centuries of footsteps that had led so many of her ancestors to their doom. Yet, she pressed forward, driven by a grim determination to end the curse once and for all, even if it meant sacrificing herself in the process. At the top of the staircase, a portrait hung crookedly on the wall. It depicted a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Morrigan, her eyes filled with the same sorrow and determination. Morrigan paused, staring into those eyes, feeling an unspoken connection to the long-dead ancestor who had begun it all. "It was her," Morrigan whispered. "She made the choice that bound us to this fate." Veyra's voice was low as she responded, "And now it's yours to undo." With a final steadying breath, Morrigan turned her gaze to the darkened corridor ahead. Whatever awaited them, there would be no turning back. The air grew colder as Morrigan and Veyra ventured deeper into the manor, each step echoing ominously off the cracked stone floors. The ravens followed them, their wings rustling in the shadows. Morrigan's heart pounded in her chest as she felt the weight of the curse intensify, the walls seeming to close in on them. Every corner they turned brought new horrors, a room filled with rotting furniture, portraits whose eyes seemed to follow their every move, and the whispers of long-dead ancestors begging to be freed. Veyra's grip on her blade tightened as they entered a narrow hallway lined with locked doors. Behind each one, something moved, scratching and clawing to be let out. "Do you feel that?" Veyra whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own footsteps. Morrigan nodded, the sense of being watched growing stronger with every passing moment. The curse wasn't just tied to the manor, it was alive, feeding on their fear, growing more powerful with each step they took. They finally reached the heart of the manor, a massive chamber at its center, dominated by an ancient altar covered in thick layers of dust. Ravens perched atop the altar, their black eyes gleaming in the dim light. Morrigan's gaze fell upon a book, its cover made of worn leather, resting atop the altar. It was the source of the curse, the very object that had sealed her family's fate centuries ago. She reached for it, her fingers trembling as she touched the ancient text, the curse whispering through her mind. As Morrigan opened the book, the manor groaned as though in pain. The pages were filled with ancient, twisted symbols, none of which she could understand, but she didn't need to. The meaning was clear. There was only one way to break the curse, and it demanded a sacrifice. Her life for the freedom of her bloodline, or the curse would continue to claim future generations. The choice was hers to make, but either way, she would lose everything. Veyra watched in silence, her eyes betraying the fear she dared not speak. The ground beneath them trembled, cracks forming in the stone floor as the ravens cawed louder, their cries echoing through the manor like a death knell. Morrigan knew time was running out. The curse was awakening fully, and if she didn't act soon, it would consume them both. But the weight of the decision pressed down on her. Could she truly sacrifice her own life to free her family? Or would she let the curse live on, sparing herself, but dooming others? The question echoed in her mind as the darkness closed in around them. The walls of the manor trembled as Morrigan stood before the altar, her fingers gripping the edges of the cursed book. The air was thick with the energy of the curse, and the ravens screamed as though they were the voices of her ancestors, demanding their release. Morrigan's pulse raced as she faced the terrible choice before her. The words from the book were clear: sacrifice her life, break the curse, and free her bloodline. But if she refused, the curse would continue to torment her descendants, and Veyra too would not be spared. The chamber around them seemed to shift and distort, as if the very fabric of reality was breaking down under the weight of the curse. Veyra, standing a few steps behind Morrigan, watched in silence, her hand trembling as she reached out to her friend. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, though they both knew the truth. The curse had consumed too much, and there was no easy way out. Morrigan's choice was inevitable, yet every fiber of her being screamed against it. Morrigan stepped forward, her gaze locked on the pages of the book, as the raven's cries reached a deafening crescendo. With one final glance at Veyra, she knew there was no turning back. The weight of her ancestors' sins pressed down upon her, but there was no room for doubt. As she raised her hand to complete the ritual, the ground beneath her feet split open, dark energy swirling up from the depths of the manor, enveloping her in its shadow. Morrigan gasped as the power of the curse surged through her veins. The shadows twisted around her, pulling her toward the edge of death. But in that moment a voice echoed through the chamber, one not her own. It was her ancestor, the very woman who had bound the bloodline to this fate. "Break the curse, and your soul will be bound to the ravens," the voice whispered. "But if you let it live on, you may yet escape." Morrigan froze, torn between the promise of freedom and the agony of the curse. Could she truly choose to save herself at the cost of those she loved? Her heart pounded as she stood at the edge of the abyss. As the swirling darkness pressed in, Morrigan's decision solidified in her mind. With one last look at Veyra, she made her choice. Her fingers traced the final rune in the book, sealing her fate. The room exploded with energy, the ravens shrieking as they burst into flames, their cries filling the manor one last time. Morrigan's body was consumed by the shadows, the curse broken, but at an unimaginable price. The echoes of the raven's curse lingered in the air, and as the darkness faded, only silence remained. The manor lay in ruin. The walls that once stood strong now crumbled, and the eerie cries of the ravens had vanished into silence. Morrigan's body lay still in the center of the chamber, her form barely visible beneath the swirling shadows that had claimed her. Veyra stood at the edge of the destruction, staring in disbelief at the wreckage that had once been her friend. The curse had been broken, but at what cost? The silence was deafening, and the weight of Morrigan's sacrifice hung heavy in the air. As the shadows began to dissipate, the manor itself seemed to exhale. The cracks in the floor sealed themselves, and the dark energy that had once filled the room slowly faded. Veyra took a hesitant step forward, her heart heavy with grief. She had known the risks, but the reality of Morrigan's fate was more than she could bear. "She's gone," Veyra whispered, her voice breaking the stillness. But as she approached Morrigan's body, something strange began to happen. Morrigan's form flickered, and for a moment, it was as though the shadows had not consumed her entirely. A faint glow appeared around her, a remnant of the curse's power lingering in the air. Veyra knelt beside her, unsure of what she was seeing. Was this the final echo of the Raven's curse, or was there still something of Morrigan left in this world? The glow pulsed once, then twice, before fading entirely. Morrigan's body was still, but Veyra couldn't shake the feeling that something remained. As Veyra stood, the weight of the curse lifted, but so did the bonds that had tied her to the manor. The ravens were gone, their spirits freed, and the oppressive fog that had surrounded the cliffs began to clear. But even in the light of freedom, a deep sense of loss remained. Veyra turned toward the broken portrait of Morrigan's ancestor, the woman who had started it all. There was no more curse, no more bloodline to torment, but the price had been far too high. Veyra left the manor in silence, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what had been lost. The ravens no longer circled the cliffs, and the fog was lifting, revealing a world that had been hidden for centuries. Morrigan had saved them all, but in doing so, she had sealed her own fate. As Veyra walked away, the echo of a raven's call sounded faintly in the distance, a final reminder of the curse that would never truly leave her. The manor was silent, the curse now nothing more than a memory, but Veyra knew the cost of that silence. Morrigan had sacrificed herself to break the curse, to free her bloodline from the raven's grasp. As Veyra stood at the edge of the cliffs, looking out at the ocean below, she could still feel the weight of her friend's sacrifice. The fog had lifted, and the world seemed brighter, but the absence of Morrigan was a wound that would never heal. The echo of the raven's calls had faded, and for the first time in centuries, the manor no longer felt like a prison. Veyra turned back to look at the crumbling structure one last time. It was no longer a place of torment, but a reminder of the strength it had taken to end the curse. And yet, even as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Morrigan's presence lingered, watching, guarding, bound to the ravens she had freed. As Veyra made her way down the cliffs, the memories of their journey together played over in her mind. She had wanted to believe there was another way, that Morrigan could have been spared. But the curse had been unyielding, and in the end, the choice had been made. The ravens, once symbols of death and despair, were gone, but their shadow would always remain, a part of Morrigan's legacy that Veyra could never escape. The sky had cleared, and the once ominous cliffs now felt like a place of peace. But even in that peace, Veyra knew that the curse had left its mark on her as well. Though she was free to leave, to live her life without fear of the ravens, the weight of Morrigan's sacrifice would forever be with her. The world had changed, and yet in some ways it remained the same. The echo of the raven's curse would live on, not in the manor, but in the hearts of those who had survived. As Veyra walked away from the manor for the last time, the faintest sound of a raven's call echoed in the distance. She paused, looking back over her shoulder, but the sky was empty. With a heavy heart, she continued onward, knowing that the curse had been broken, but its memory would never truly fade.